welcome to the Rewatchers on the pod. I'm Mitchell Marshall here along with
Tyler McKinley,
Marcus Marinos,
Tyler Harris,
Justin Hammer.
Welcome to our podcast where we're mixing it up instead of doing any movies or particularly following along a television program. We're going to be talking about our favorite pop culture things from the year and the decade, as well as a wild card, which is pretty much anything from the last decade we want that influenced us and our thoughts and feelings. So let's get right into it. Justin, you're going to kick us off with your favorite thing of the year.
Favorite thing of the year, which when I was asked to do this, I was a dumbass and thought it was favorite movie of the decade. So originally, I chose Spider-Man and Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse, because I thought I was doing favorite movie of the decade. So I'm going to talk about Spider-Verse for just a sec.
Yeah.
Then we'll touch a little bit on The Lighthouse. So Spider-Verse, I watched it this year, actually.
It counts. It came to Netflix this year, you know?
That's basically how I consume all my media is a year late on Netflix. So, you know.
I think when a movie gets to Netflix, that's like its actual birth.
Yes.
Everything else, it's like, it's just gestation.
It got conceived in the theaters, but
Yeah,
then
exactly.
it came out of the fallopian tube for Netflix.
Wow, I don't want to explore
Is that not how?
No, let's keep going with that, Mitchell.
pregnancy at all.
I've got Twin Peaks flashbacks right now. So, yeah. Spider-Verse.
Why do you like talking about fallopian tubes?
His intervention right now.
I have a family. Okay.
But yeah, I also watched it this year too.
Cool.
It was really good. Tell
was
us
really
why
good.
you liked it.
So what I did when I was trying to figure out what my top movie of the decade was is I basically just like Google searched every movie that came out each year and then just like went through and like made a note of, yeah, I saw that one. I liked that one. Really liked that one. And just kept going. And I discovered that like my most favorite movies that I've seen came out recently. And of those, Spider-Verse was like, really, it was up there, and obviously I chose that one as my favorite movie of the decade. There's not a lot of animated movies that I want to watch like over and over again, especially with kids who do watch animated movies over and over again. But Spider-Verse, like, I don't think I'm ever going to get tired of watching that movie. It's absolutely gorgeous to just visually. It's like. Yeah, it's incredible to watch just from a visual point of view. The story is really good. It feels real. It feels like it resonates with me. I'm a 30-year-old dude without superpowers, and yet I liked the story and felt like I could get something out of it, which I guess that's kind of the point of superheroes in general, though, is like you got to find... Yeah, that's why we like superheroes. But
it feels fresh, which is the thing that, like, with Spider-Man, who's been iterated on so many times, even just in movies,
right.
Like, I feel like that is a huge deal. Yeah.
I've seen. I did not see the latest Spider-Man movie. Whatever that one was called, Far From Home. That's the only Spider-Man movie I have not watched that has come out like in the last decade, basically.
Yeah.
And with all of the Marvel movies that came out, I didn't think that I would really pick a superhero movie as my top movie. And yet, here I am saying Spider-Verse is my top movie. It's a fantastic movie. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm completely in love with it. I will be sharing that movie with everybody for forever. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about Spider-Verse?
I remember when I first saw the trailer for Spider-Verse, I was like, I think I'll pass.
It looked like a straight-to-video thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Those were my thoughts exactly, and I was like, really? This is where and it's another Spider-Man. Like, we're doing another thing. This is ridiculous. And then I saw it getting super good reviews. I had a lot of people telling me about it, and then when I went and saw it, I was blown away. It is the most unique animation style I have ever seen. It's so cool, and then you have the different layers of story and the dimensional aspect where they can kind of go anywhere they want with it.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Well, and I think it's so smart because it knows you have to know when you're making a Spider-Man movie what people are going to expect, and they subvert enough of those expectations in super fun ways, like the Doc Ock stuff, where it's a woman, and like that stuff is all is so much fun. that I feel like it just lends itself to the like keeping all of that fresh and making it feel new for sure.
It's so fun. It's so funny. When it comes to the comic bookness, it of course looks like a comic book in some ways, but it just leans into it. It's like, we're not going to try and fit your canon. I don't care what the hell you saw in like Wikipedia or what you've seen in 50 other Spider-Man movies. Like, we're going to have fun. We're going to take elements that people who enjoy this type of storytelling will enjoy. When it came to the transdimensional stuff, they didn't overcomplicate it. I don't know if it makes sense. I honestly don't remember, but I certainly remember not caring if it mattered, because I was enjoying being with these people. And then there is a ton of emotional resonance, like where the position of Miles' uncle and everyone else in the story at the end, and like there's a little bit of a meet cute and everything with the Spider Girl. Sorry, I don't know what she's called.
Gwen.
Oh, Spider Gwen. Isn't it Spider Gwen?
Yeah,
I think Spider Gwen. Yeah,
That's fine.
I just think it came together in all the right ways. And yeah, I was invested in the end, and like, is everyone going to get home and be happy and survive? And I'm sure that the way that reactor thing was exploding mattered, but I think so much more than that. I was having an enjoyable time. I was invested in the people. And there have been other animated superhero, like DC once in a while will release a Batman, Superman movie into theaters, like a limited release. And I've always just said, well, it's just a longer TV show, and some people are like, well, there's some really good ones, but I don't think anything has ever come close to coming into a crowded market, being its own independent thing, and just exponentially growing in its popularity and what a unique view it is. And Lord and Miller, who kind of affected the animated world in another way with Lego Movie and did something quite unique, like huge props that they were able to shepherd this and this really incredible thing to the theater. And it's certainly like, it's going to be remembered and have an impact on our superhero storytelling and our movies, like, for a long time.
I think, the way I started watching movies in my life was watching Disney movies as a kid. That's where I originally started to learn about stories, was through Disney. Animated movies where everything works out in the end, everything is great, everybody's happy. And like, I think about all of the movies I've watched that have made me think really deep thoughts, or like have confused me and made me feel like various emotions about the state of humanity, just like everything that you can experience in a movie. And like being able to watch a movie like Spider-Man that just takes me back to being a kid where things are okay, and doing it in a way that as an adult I still connect with. That's another reason for why I chose Spider-Man as one of my top movies.
I feel like it's important to know also this is the only movie that had the balls to cast Nicolas Cage and John Mulaney as Spider-Man.
yeah.
What we've all been waiting for finally happened.
There was a release for every Spider-Man movie made. There's a release the Cage Mulaney cut.
The Cage Mulaney.
Last thing I just want to say on that is there's also like the emotional themes are like basic enough when you talk about how pop culture should make, or movies that we like should really make us think and feel, and sometimes that's a negative, or sometimes it's hard to get out of. This is so enjoyable, but kids are going to like this movie, adults are going to appreciate this movie in 1,000 ways, and the people in between, like, they can start to get in touch with the second level of storytelling through it, which is just a sneaky genius thing to do.
Yeah, I won't take much longer. I'm pretty vocal about my dislike of Marvel movies and the kind of superhero genre in general. I dislike them. I dislike sitting through 20-minute action sequences when there hasn't been enough character building for me to care what happens to those characters in those action sequences. This movie is able to pull that off. This movie delves into the characters enough that I care about at least enough of them that the action sequences are engaging. It does help that it's visually super stimulating, but it's like, I loved every single one of those characters. I really bought into their struggles, particularly the three mains. Mm-hmm. And just that whole last sequence, I was hooked from beginning to end, and I'm someone who doesn't like that genre a whole lot. So,
cool. Tyler, keep us going with your favorite pop culture thing of the decade.
That's an unfair title. I had, like everyone else, I had a lot of things I could have chose from. And the thing that I've picked is in my top 10 movies of the decade, because I did list out my top 10. I narrowed it down. And I wouldn't say this is I probably wouldn't say this is my favorite thing of the decade, but I think it's something that, once again, it's in my top 10. And I think it had such an effect on kind of humor in pop culture going forward. And that's Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And the movie, I actually still have not read the comic, much to Tyler's dismay.
Both great, both incredible.
Which is weird because I've read Seconds. I've read his other one, which
also
is great.
yeah.
Which I hope they make some adaptation out of at some point.
Yeah, me too.
But anyway, Scott Pilgrim, it was one of those movies where I did not watch movies for a couple of years, and then I went over to Tyler Harris's parents' house, and I said, give me everything that came out in these 2 years. And they gave me this huge stack of movies. I went home and watched a whole bunch of shit, like The A-Team, and
Shouts to Bradley Cooper.
just some garbage movies that came out. That was a bad 2 years for movies.
That was real bad.
But there were a couple standouts. Like Inception was the first one I watched. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And then
This is exactly my experience too. That I watched Inception, and then
and then I watched Scott Pilgrim versus the World by myself. I then proceeded to watch Scott Pilgrim versus the World at like 7 different people's homes within the span of like a month. And I wasn't the one that like instigated it. It's a story and a film that is just so targeted to our generation, to the point where like. I don't know how they pulled it off, how much they had to pay him, but like they're using sound effects from Zelda in it, which is like, if you want to win me over in the first opening minutes of a movie. But also something that Scott Pilgrim does really well, a lot of movies struggle with, is whenever there's a band in a movie and they have to perform original music written for the movie, it always sucks ass.
Yeah.
And this movie actually is pretty good.
Yeah.
I remember when that opening song plays when Sex Bombs opens for Knives in their living room, and it's a cool opening credit sequence. The camera stretch and everything is really cool. Yeah. But I just remember being halfway through, like, wait, I'm enjoying this song. It's really cool. It fits the tone of the movie really nicely. Edgar Wright is just on his own level of visual storytelling. We've talked about it before. We talked about World's End. We've talked about the Every Frame a Painting video on him. If you haven't seen that, go watch it. He's so good, and he's the perfect fit for even comic book movies in general. I think they should give him more comic book movies. But I think he also is a perfect fit for the Scott Pilgrim humor. How he does comedic timing and illustrates jokes, I think works really well, with a lot of weird meta references and just like this weird movie that's supposed to take place in the reality of Toronto, Canada, but everyone has like supernatural elements to them that aren't ever explained or touched on.
So
and
good.
really the only backstory you need on that is, have you ever played a video game? There you go.
Yeah.
Like,
And Scott Pilgrim is a really good fighter for some reason.
and a not so great bass player. That bass duel is way lopsided in quality there.
Well, I mean, that guy was using his special vegan powers
that
too.
is true.
That does let you strum that bass real good.
It's unfair.
Like, so many good jokes, so many good, like a movie that has such good visual jokes that you like can't quote, and quotable lines.
Yeah.
Just a lot of great stuff there.
Also, I feel like introducing us to the actors we were going to see over the
Yeah.
next 10 years.
yeah.
I mean, Anna Kendrick, Aubrey Plaza, Chris Evans. Chris Evans is like one of my favorite parts of that movie. Just when he's like walking away after he thinks he's defeated Scott, and he's just like, that was actually hilarious. Like, something about that line and delivery is
I
so
quote that a
perfect.
lot, yeah.
So good.
There's a
Kieran Culkin.
yeah,
Brie-
yeah.
Brie
Oh my
Larson?
gosh.
What?
Brie
Yeah,
Larson?
yeah, she's
Brie Larson?
Larson,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
forgot.
yeah.
Yeah, I did not know. I feel so stupid. I didn't know that was Brie Larson until like 2 years ago. I was like, holy shit.
There's a weird span of years where like Brie Larson was just in the background a bunch of stuff, and she never quite looked the same. Like, she always, I don't know if it's just there's enough space between, and all
And
that.
if you
but
hear
yeah,
the pop
it's really
album
good.
she released, completely different.
Yeah, for sure.
But man, I fucking love that movie. It's so good. I mean, sure, you might be able to argue there's better Edgar Wright films, but I don't know. This one just hits my biases perfectly, and it's a really well done movie.
Yeah.
It was funny because when I did borrow the movies from your dad was like, that movie is not very good. I'm like, well, you are a little out of the demographic
Yeah.
there. But yeah, man, I fucking love this movie, and I don't know what else to say about it. I just still find myself wanting to keep talking about it. Yeah, it's so good. It's
Yeah.
just good. I do. Oh, it's something I do love is, and the part of this is because it is based on a comic. You're already drawing from things that already exist, but it's fun to have characters that you care about and are having a fun time with, that are still not necessarily making all the right choices, who are kind of very flawed characters, and you do get to watch them grow. And I think Scott's a good example of that. Yeah, and we can all resonate with his past damage that he has, and then trying to make up for that by making choices I wouldn't necessarily agree with. And I think that's a really fun part to watch.
I think that I think one of the coolest things about Scott Pilgrim too is it's a great adaptation of the comic book, and specifically the way it was adapted was those comic books were not finished when Edgar Wright started writing that script. But Edgar Wright was reading Scott Pilgrim, and he's like, holy shit, I'm going to make this movie. And so he called Brian Lee O'Malley, and they basically kind of wrote the last 3 books of Scott Pilgrim sort of together. I mean, Brian Lee O'Malley obviously wrote those, but Brian Lee O'Malley said there are ideas in there that I can't remember if they're mine or Edgar's. But the last 3 books of Scott Pilgrim are vastly different from the movie. I think if you go into the beginning of the Scott Pilgrim comic books, they almost work as storyboards for the first part of that movie. That movie is pitch perfect down to costumes. It's fucking incredible. But then there's a point where the comic book actually covers a much longer span of time. There's times when Ramona and Scott break up and then get back together over, this 6 months or whatever, and all of that. And it's just really, to me, a really great example of an adaptation where Edgar Wright was like, yeah, I'm not gonna have them break up in the middle and then skip ahead 6 months and have the rest. You know what I mean? It's I know the strengths of this medium, and I know where we're going, and because of that, he made strong choices that fit the medium he's working in, which is incredible, and it's really good. It's a great movie.
Great movie.
I like it a lot.
It's just joyful and rewatchable.
Yeah.
All right, Marcus, your wild card for the decade.
Wild card. We're gonna switch gears pretty hardcore here.
Sounds like Scott Pilgrim to me.
I would just like to mention that Mitchell looks like a very cute Buzz Lightyear right now, though.
Oh,
With his hoodie on.
That is the Pixar character I relate to third most.
I have always noticed when you wear that hoodie how tight that hood is.
It's just a comfy I would look
It
at 2
looks
hoodies
comfy.
that if
You
I could
look
wear those 2
cozy.
hoodies every day, I would.
It's not like that. It's designed to be that way.
Yeah.
But
it's for athletes.
Yeah.
I'm not an athlete.
From New York.
Yes, only Northeastern athletes.
Anyway, speaking of Brooklyn athletes, what's your decade thing, Marcus?
Jesus Christ.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
I'm going to take a selfie.
My wild card I chose to discuss. It seemed when Tyler kind of brought up the idea of doing this podcast, doing kind of like an end of year, and like a wild card thing, you could talk whatever you want about. And it this idea seemed like it was just something I needed to talk about. I really couldn't choose anything else for this topic because it is very it has affected my life in significant ways, and it also affects a lot of the people I know, and including everybody in this room.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Mormonism and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and specifically transitioning out of the faith. All of us here, Mormonism has touched our lives in different ways, and I know we're all kind of at different stages when it comes to the church in different places. And I know this is sort of a taboo topic, but I think it's a very important one, and I think it's important that it's discussed. So I'm very I'm excited to talk about this with you guys, even if it's only for a short moment. I've talked about this with Tyler a bit. Justin and I have kind of talked about it a little bit, but about a year ago is when I decided I made the decision to leave the church, which is a big decision. Considering I was born in the church, I was raised in the church. I served a 2-year mission. I think everyone here served a mission, right? Not Mitchell? Okay.
Nope.
But the church, when you're in the church, it's a very big part of your life. and it kind of defines you. And so making the decision to leave is a very big decision. It's a very life-changing decision. And it was very difficult at the time. Tyler and I have talked about that. You know, I feel like I definitely went through a mini identity crisis because, you know, when you look at the world a certain way and you look at yourself a certain way, and then all of that kind of, you know, is taken from you. You have to figure out, okay, well, how do I look at the world now? How do I look at myself? And although it was a very difficult transition, I can pretty confidently say that it was one of the better decisions I've made personally for me. Mm-hmm. And 2019 was a great year. One of the best years, if not the best year. It had its difficulties, but I relate a lot of the good things that came out of 2019 to that decision to leave the church, because I felt like a whole new world was opened up to me, and a whole new set of experiences that I never would have had if it not were for that decision. So I'd love to hear,
Yeah,
Tyler,
real quick. I just wanted to say, how old are you, Marcus? I can't remember.
I'm 23.
Okay,
I think I'm the youngest out of all of you guys.
By a lot.
Yeah. But you guys are all like 30 and above, right?
I'm like 60.
You sound like it.
That's
I've had
why I
people
like
tell me,
David
why
Lynch
do you
so
do a
much.
podcast with a 60-year-old?
I got good takes.
I think it is important to notice real quick that it is your family from Utah?
Yes.
Yeah, it is a much bigger decision to make, I feel like, when you live here.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that is something to also take into consideration as we're talking about
When a
it.
lot of your relationships are based here, and it's one of my least favorite things about Utah, frankly, is that we're not more open with dialogue about it. And it is extremely common, although Utah's getting less conservative, less LDS, it gets toxic in ways it shouldn't because of the condescension on both sides. Yeah. And that I really dislike about this. I'm not from Utah. I don't have roots here really, and it's one of the harder things about being here because
Where are your roots a little bit?
my roots are from the Denver area, but previous to that, all my family's from California.
Okay,
so. Gotcha. Also the ground, the roots, the
And the band.
Also the movie Roots, the miniseries.
No, I do want to kind of talk about something that you brought up, Marcus, is the idea of I mean, I've had similar, very different, but similar trajectories. Especially, I feel like this last decade for me is broken up into two very distinct chunks because of events in my life, and I think that is one of those things that is really terrifying. Is letting go of things that you've held on to for your entire life, and that have been constants for your entire life, and then not having that safety net anymore is a really terrifying experience. And for me, it was until I looked like behind me or to the right into places I'd never looked, and started to find things and see things that I hadn't seen before. But yeah, I totally understand. It's such a weird thing. It's one of those things. Weird. We have talked a lot about it. I think, and well, not a lot. It's not like we've talked a good amount of time on it, and it's still one of those things. I'm like, I still don't. Sometimes there just aren't words for that type of thing because it is so much. It's such a personal thing, and it's such a personal experience that it becomes really hard to pin it down.
Yeah. And I almost hate. I have two brothers who have also left the church. We all left around the same time, but I almost hate how much we talk about it and how much it gets brought up in conversation. But at the same time, it's how could you not talk about it? Yeah. You know, when it's been something that is, you know, was such a key part of your upbringing, and you know when 2/3 of people in Utah are Mormons.
It surrounds you.
Yeah, it surrounds you, and you know you're surrounded by the culture. So, you know, it was definitely something that I made the decision, and I kind of just wanted to I'll leave it behind me, and I will now move on with the rest of my life. But I've determined that that's not going to be possible in a way.
Yeah.
But there's, it's not to say that being in the church didn't bring extremely positive things in my life. And I feel like at this point I can kind of just take those things, the good things, and apply those and kind of leave the rest. Yeah. But Justin, I want to know what you think. What you have to say about all this? Even though there may be a lot to say.
No, I liked what Tyler said about how it's something that, like, hearing you say all these things, like, it resonates with me because, like, I feel very similar, but at the same time, like, it's such a personal thing too. Like, right. Tyler and I have talked a bit about our experiences, our individual experiences as well, and like, it's weird because there's this. We're going through these experiences together, but it's so unique too. Like,
right.
I don't know. It's hard to explain. And like, even like, Gwen and I, our decision to leave the church as well. Like, my path was totally different from hers. And, I don't know. It's, unless you are here in Utah and you grew up in the culture and the experience, I don't think that's something that you really understand or get to understand. At least that's based on my understanding. Maybe I just don't know how other people live their lives, which is true. But yeah, it's such a unique thing. I think one of the things that I was told as a member of the church is like, think of all the people that are on the planet and you're part of the one true church, and you get like, it's a special thing that you have. And that kind of shapes like how you view your religious activity and your identity as a person. And that was something that was really hard for me to lose. But since then, something that I've kind of like, I think is kind of badass is like, yeah, there's all these people that aren't Mormon, and like a lot of people who have never even heard the word Mormon before, or who ever will. And like, I'm the one who, like, I went through that. I don't know, this probably doesn't make sense what I'm trying to say, but like, there was like this specialness about being a part of the group that I felt like I lost. But now I kind of feel like I've taken that back, and like there's a uniqueness about my life now. When I was kind of like drowning in like existential fear and everything from losing my belief system, like I latched onto this, like, well, my life is still unique and cool because I'm going through this. Like, it's kind of a badass thing to think about. I don't know.
I do want to bring up
definitely
that the night Justin told me that he was leaving the church, we were playing Overwatch. We were playing online.
Were you escorting the payload or capturing the points?
No, even worse. We were playing competitive Overwatch. The menu pops up to select your character, which is a timed thing, which is, if you've ever played competitive Overwatch, is a very stressful and important time, because if you pick the wrong thing, people will let you know how much of a piece of shit you are. And right as I'm like scrambling, everyone's like, it's more stressful because you can see what other people pick, so they're like picking it, and they like lock characters. You're like, oh crap, who do I pick? And Justin's like, hey, I just want to talk to you. I'm like, okay. And he's like, yeah, Gwen and I have decided to leave the church. I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to read this? Like, how am I supposed to respond right now? I was like, that's cool, man. I'm gonna be diva. So yeah, no, that was.
I'm so sorry.
No, but I think that's like,
I ruined Overwatch that night.
But I think that's such an important story, is like, because honestly, that's how it. Living where we do, sometimes that's the thing that it just has to be said whenever you can.
Yeah.
And
well, I think for some people it is, you don't know, you want to make sure that, I don't know, you're not reading each other wrong, you're coming at each other, you want to be open with each other, especially with people you're really close with.
Yeah.
I had already kind of figured it out when you told me. Yeah. But I knew my response was important at the time. and at that time, I was still trying to make my life in the church work. It was actually not too long after that I kind of made the decision to let go and move on. And mine sounds, I don't know, Wally, we can talk about it later too, because I don't want to spend all the time on it. But
Right.
mine was a lot very gradual and smooth, to be honest. It was just kind of a thing of like, there were things I always believed, and certain ways things probably worked. And then I got into that whole, like, and once again, it sounds like a pretentious philosophy, but it really is something I think is really important for people to grasp hold of, is like that philosophy of all I know is that I know nothing. And that's what I've kind of tried to live my life by now. So whenever there's a differing opinion, I'm like, I have an opinion on that, but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
And they could be totally right. And I'm fine with that. And I've really worked hard to try and always be like, I could always be wrong. And I'm definitely open to admitting that. And that really helped me kind of really grasp of like, oh, there's these things that I like believed how they worked. And I always thought that's what the church was saying. Like whenever I brought it up to people, they're like, oh yeah, that's how it works. And then, but then the more I heard and the more that was taught, I realized, oh, that's not what's being taught. The opposite is actually being taught. And that's not what I believe. And so it was kind of just like a slow realizing of like, oh, we're not on the same page here. And I don't agree.
Yeah.
And it's another thing in my life. And actually, honestly, it's weirdly enough, there was a talk in the LDS General Conference that like helped me make that decision in a positive way. Like not in like, I disagree with that. It was I agree with that. It was I think it was the Elder Eyring talk. He spoke about simplifying and cutting out the bullshit, essentially. And I was like, that's what I need. It was like, I feel bad about it, but it was honestly like when Max was born, my life was so stressful that I was like, I need to cut everything out of it that is not necessary. And that was one of them. And I was like, that's it. And so that was a big moment for my decade too. So yeah, they can definitely sympathize.
Yeah, for sure.
That is fascinating.
I think it's important, just because, like I said, we live here. It's interesting. I don't know how much you grew up in Utah, but was it everything?
It was. I was born in Colorado, but then I moved here when I was very young. So most of my life, I grew up in Utah.
I probably have a different relationship with the church for a couple reasons. One, I did not grow up in Utah, and I do think that really changes. My environment was just far less affected by the church.
Yeah.
And I also did not serve a mission, which wasn't because I grew up outside of Utah. Like I actually was going to and everything. And so, but I am, I think I'm the only one here who still attends the church and counts himself as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I definitely trust you guys. So I think if you didn't know that, like it doesn't bother me. And I think we also can have healthy discussions. I have with Tyler. If you haven't noticed, Tyler's kind of a common thread among us, but Justin and Tyler all grew up together. So yeah, we should put a disclaimer before, like, hey, the next 15 minutes we're going to do something different. But I think if you like listening to us, it's really interesting, and the faith matters to how you approach storytelling, and then you do everything. And so in general, I think a lot of, I'm definitely a non-traditional Mormon. I definitely have agnostic feelings and more personal relationship than because I think the culture is different from the church, and the toxicity in that confusion and the being surrounded. I don't want to live in Utah. Actually, earlier when you were talking about the last black man in San Francisco, and you talked about putting down roots, like it made me think I really want to see it because I want to know, because of my relationship. I've only lived in two places, Colorado till I was 18, and now Utah. And I think that seriously matters, because it's who and what and how you want to live your life, and whether it restricts your freedom. And like you said, the positive and negatives, that the things you choose to put in your life bring into it. And I think it's really common since, I don't know, the 60s for people to leave faith and change and do different things throughout their 20s and 30s, and I think that is an important part of growing into who you are. And so I'm certainly, when I moved to Utah, especially started working in Salt Lake, I realized how many people were not Mormon that grew up Mormon. Yeah. And so there's a whole former Mormon, there's an ex-Mormon, there's an anti-Mormon, and that is all there's actually a new dating app. And you register, you're a former Mormon, and you register your
Is this true?
feelings.
No way.
No, dead serious.
Wow.
And you register as to like how anti the church or how like, hey, like my family's still part of it. I'm still friends. Like I still believe parts of it. So what's important to you? But yeah, like Christianity is extremely important to me, and there's a lot of joy that comes from it. I think a lot of your family still are. I don't think I've ever felt anything anti, but that is where it goes a lot, and I think that's what's hard. Is the discussion goes, then it gets condescending, and like a lot of people in a faith, and it doesn't matter what faith, are condescending if you look and feel differently because they have a narrow focus.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the opposite, that's when it gets difficult for me, is then when I get condescended towards because of my choices, and I get everyone's hurt and fear, and that is where, to be frank, more than half my friends have gone, and that is fine with me, and like enduring love, regardless of that being related to faith or not, is really important. Yeah. And so I just wanted to say that from my perspective, because I think I come from a different place of everyone. Yeah. But also, like, the times when I went through serious depression, I went through serious times where I was not significant part of church. Like, I'm not particularly active right now in my participation. It's just, I certainly feel like I have love and empathy and common positive discussions, and again, agnostic feelings and understandings of the universe as a whole that relate to that choice. And certainly like seeing different people go through it. And there is like a wonder, like you felt like you already knew Justin had. And like when I meet people, like unless there's a blatant sign, then there's a thought to where do they stand with it in Utah. And I kind of hate it.
Yeah, honestly, and I actually get that from both sides a lot.
Yeah.
People who I meet who have left the church and are pretty anti-church, they always need to know. It's always like people at work, it's always happens at work too, like, because we got a big mix there.
Sure.
And I'm friends with everyone, and they all, like, at some point will pull, mostly the anti people aren't the ones who pull me aside, like, where are you at with the church? Like, I'm like, does it matter?
They're like, I was looking on the dating app and I didn't see you on there, which I do want to say, hearing about that app makes me think we have less time than I thought. So I'm like really like trying to get stuff
Mormonism,
together.
there's a few things that really show it. Like, okay, if they drink, probably not. But then you don't know how they feel towards it, how they're going to approach a discussion with it, and how like toxic to be. But it might just come down to like, wow, the things they talk and say and what they do, and it's just interesting.
I think a big takeaway from Utah itself is we can see that there's a huge culture problem throughout all of it and how it's being handled. And I wish people on both sides of the line could kind of get their heads out of their ass. And it's like there's good people and bad people, just like in any group of people, I feel like. And I don't know what your guys' opinion are, how strong your feelings are on all that with each individual. In my opinion, I get really frustrated living here and just being barraged by two really loud not necessarily minorities, but just groups within that larger groups. And I'm just like, shut the hell up.
And it's funny because it's a microcosm to the politics, not necessarily because there are conservatives and liberals on both sides. And I'm sorry, we've gone way too long on this. I know.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I think we should all talk about this for sure. But I think is there anything else? I want to let you kind of close this out. Since it is your topic and you brought it up, like, is there anything else you want to say or address, or I don't know if there's anything, but
just thanks for letting me talk about this, and I'm happy I could hear everyone's different perspectives and we could have this discussion. You know, just like Justin said, we have had this experience of such a unique subculture. And it's interesting to talk about. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Sorry for sabotaging it so
Absolutely
much.
not.
I
Not at all. I don't think- I
didn't
think-
want to take it away from you.
Not at all. Not at all.
Definitely a good one to talk about. This one actually might transition better than all of our other transitions.
Oh, is it? Oh,
It's Tyler Harris. What is your TV show or movie of the decade?
Well, so obviously my TV show of the decade, we already talked hours and hours and hours and hours on, is Twin Peaks. So I actually gave myself a pass on this one and get to talk about something else. But I actually, since we're on this topic of spirituality, I actually kind of came down to two movies that, like I said, this decade feels split in half for me as two very distinct pieces. And these are both movies from those distinct pieces that affected me at those very precise times. But the first one I want to talk about is Tree of Life, which came out in 2011 or 10, one of those. It's a movie directed by Terrence Malick, who is a really awesome director. But Tree of Life also, not even just the spiritual aspects of that movie, but as a movie, really pushed me into my love of challenging movies, challenging art, really. It is a non-linear story that is about the relationship of a son to his father, that is kind of kicked off at the beginning by him finding out that his father is dying, and then the whole rest of the movie becomes this kind of flashback to him remembering things about his father, and then ends with one of the most beautiful and like transcendent things I feel like I've seen in a movie about their reconciliation, and it's one of those movies. It's one of my favorite stories to tell about watching a movie, because
I think I've heard.
Like halfway through, I was like, what the hell is this bullshit? I was like, I watched Sean Penn like walk around a sort of blurry office building for 15 minutes, and then there were dinosaurs and volcanoes for another 20 minutes, and now I'm watching a little kid hit a bird with a hammer. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then in the last 10 minutes of the movie, I was like a literal just mess, just sobbing and like feeling everything I'd ever felt in my life to that point. But to me, it was just, like I said, not only for that emotional like experience I had watching that movie, but also just for my own life of being like, holy shit, I get film as art. I get why you want to watch something that is quote unquote boring or long, or you know what I mean? Those were the things I used to describe those movies as. And now I'm like, I totally understand the power of that and what it can do.
It's so funny you say it, because when I saw it, I need to rewatch it. I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
And it's not that I hated it, because I did see the merit and the interest, and I was affected, but it did not. Maybe it propelled me to, but I was like, that was still a little too long and boring. But you know what? The Irishman was still too long and boring, so maybe I'm not there yet.
Well, no, and I think it's another thing is like that I watched that movie at a very specific time in my life. Like I think that my relationship to that movie cannot be separated from where I was when I first saw it as well. And I think that's an important thing. You know what I mean? And I mean, even just our experiences on their own feel like great commentaries on film is art. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it should be. The second, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on it.
I mean, I love this movie, and I definitely would want to talk a little bit about it. I won't take too much time, but I mean, the story I thought you were going to tell is when you told me the first time you watched the first part with your dad.
Oh yeah,
and
that's
when the creation scene, the creation of the earth is just this. Has everyone seen it here?
Oh yeah.
Have you seen it? There's a point in the movie where all of a sudden the creation of the earth happens for 20 minutes. And it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah.
If you like space, that's like something like, I had this weird conversation with my wife, and I warned her it was going to be weird, but I'm like, we were just once going to scrolling through videos and seeing animals doing weird shit. And I was like, this is going to sound really bizarre, but chimpanzees, when I see them behaving like humans, it like brings out this like strong emotional response in me. Almost like, it's almost like, since we share common ancestry evolution-wise, it's almost like a window back in time for me. And that just feels so like, makes you feel so small and like weird. And that scene, that movie does that to you. There's this beautiful operatic score accompanying it, and it's just this I think it's all practical effects that he uses to create this outer space scene, and it's really crazy and beautiful visually, audibly, and just it's one of those. You said it was the point where your dad was like, well, if this is doing it for you, that's great. And then walked up the stairs and left. For me, it was the thing that hooked me with that movie. After that, I was glued. I couldn't tear away from it. And I'd echo everything you said. I won't talk about it anymore, but if you haven't seen it, watch it, but be prepared to like really dig deep. Yeah.
I will say they just released an extended cut of this movie, and it's just as good. But I just want to mention this. Terrence Malick, when he was putting this together for the Criterion Collection, wanted to make a version of this movie that would put the scenes in random order every time you watched it. Which would have been a fucking incredible experiment for cinema. But they couldn't get it to work. They just like couldn't get it to reliably work on like every Blu-ray player, because there's 9 million Blu-ray players, so you can never guarantee. But that honestly, that this is the type of movie you could probably do that with.
I feel like they should do it for the streaming, like the Criterion
It would
streaming
be really
channel.
cool.
They should be able to do that.
Yeah,
now.
and again,
If
I don't
Bandersnatch
know.
worked,
I don't know what the technology behind that is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like, it's really
That's such a
fascinating.
cool idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Terrence Malick is really great. Sorry. So briefly, I want to talk about the other movie that I think has informed and helped me on my spiritual journey this decade is First Reformed. And in a lot of ways, these movies to me are inseparable, just because I feel like for me, they strike so many similar chords. And I always think of First Reformed as a spiritual successor to Tree of Life, not because it shares visual like similarities at all. They are incredibly different movies. But First Reformed is it was released in 2017, directed by Paul Schrader, who's a transcendentalist. He's really fucking awesome. But he made this movie with Ethan Hawke about a priest who is at a small Christian church that's part of a much bigger church in upstate New York, who has an experience with one of his parishioners, I guess is what you call him, that makes him start to question his faith and also kind of his place in everything. And it's such a great movie to me because I just remember it was another one of those movies where I felt really represented and seen in a way that I don't normally feel from film.
You're a white guy.
I know saying that, but talking about like
deeper piece of recognition. That's
talking
important.
about spiritual backgrounds and stuff like that. We've talked about that. Ours is a different background than most. But just in watching that movie, that I feel like that is represented in such a beautiful way. And I think for me, this movie, kind of in talking about leaving the church and stuff, and that fear, for me, it was this fear that there was nothing outside of that, and that I was maybe resigning myself from good to just fine. And I guess for me, who has seen this movie? If you and Marcus, I'm gonna kind of spoil the end of this movie and a couple moments in this movie actually. Basically, the plot it begins. Kind of the thing that kicks it off is Amanda Seyfried's character asking Ethan Hawke to come and talk to her husband, who has just been released from prison because he's protesting ecological things that are happening and stuff like that. He's an activist. And you find out that he also maybe had plans for a very drastic act of suicide bombing something, or they find this vest of explosives. But it kind of sets off this idea where Ethan Hawke begins to look into all this stuff and realizes that the church that he's working with is funded largely by this company that is causing all this pollution. And he also is facing this cancer diagnosis that he's not sharing with anyone. He's trying to keep this diary and try to reconcile the way he feels, like try to really portray himself honestly for, I think, the first time in a very long time. But there are two moments in this movie, both of them involving Amanda Seyfried, that are so incredibly powerful. And one is Amanda, they develop this relationship, and Amanda Seyfried comes to him at his house late one night after her husband commits suicide. Also, that should be noted, it happens. And she comes and is just talking to him about all these things she's feeling, and she tells him about this thing her and her husband used to do, which was they called it the Magical Mystery Tour. And they would basically fully clothed lay on top of each other and like just touch as much as they can, just look into each other's eyes. And it's this really adorable story. And she ends up doing that with Ethan Hawke, and it's this really bizarre and weird scene at the top. But what happens in the film at that point is all of the lights and the room that they are in fades to black, and they begin to levitate in this room, and then the room falls away and they are in space, and then you just see all this imagery and everything, and it is this incredibly transcendent moment in this movie that other than that has just been so straightforward and so grounded in real emotion and everything. And to have this moment, which then leads to Ethan Hawke's character maybe deciding to use this suicide vest to blow up this this big thing that their church is holding. And the way the film culminates is him deciding to do that, and then she shows up and he can't do it anymore, and he's rapping. It's this incredibly visceral and disturbing scene of him deciding to drink drain cleaner and wrapping himself in barbed wire because it's the only way he sees out. And then it ends with her coming into the room and them like embracing and kissing, and that's the way the movie ends. And to me, it was just such this. I'm getting really emotional thinking about it, but it's just this incredible idea that there is always something there for you. You know what I mean? And even at the darkest moments, there are these things, and that can be God. That can be those things. And anyways, I'm rambling. That probably doesn't make any sense. But for me, it was just such an incredible movie. That really, really connected with me, and I really loved. But yeah, I don't know. Your thoughts.
I don't.
Way too long. So.
I definitely didn't have the same personal connection to the level that you did with it. I definitely loved the movie and appreciate it on a lot of different levels. I think a big thing about this movie for me, and you may disagree, is for me it was kind of like a message about priorities, kind of, with a lot of different sub messages as well. But it's kind of like, I don't know, it kind of tears them off as like your religious beliefs come next to like immediate need, which eventually you take that next step further. Some of those things are even on the back burner for people being the most important. And that moment where they do kind of transcend is the one connection he has with someone that truly makes him feel that way. And together they, are taken to a place that they've never kind of reached before. Yeah. And to me, that was that big moment of like kind of realizing like if something's getting in the way between how you interact with people, you're probably doing it wrong. Yeah. And there's both movies you've recommended of Last Black Man in San Francisco and this, I think both had some sub messages of that are, no matter where you sit on a particular issue or personal opinion on something, there's a self-critique in there that might be hard for you to face in both of those films. Yeah, and I think that's important for everyone to watch with that in mind and keep an open mind to be willing to critique yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, those are my movies. Sorry, we've spent too long on those, but
we're transitioning into mine, right? And yes. I kind of have a split thing on it. Kind of will continue with that because I did want to give a shout out to the film Silence because that one, although not my favorite film of the decade, I think has once with that same concept I just described. It does share similarities with those films of there's some hard truths in there that can apply. It's definitely directed at a religious crowd for some hard truths to come to, but I think that applies for anyone. I think you can apply those principles to an atheist, to an agnostic, to anyone. Yeah. Of there's certain things that we hold so important that really they might be fine to go along with, but if it's hurting other people, or if it's affecting other people, you need to let go. You need to swallow your own pride and just move on. And I think Silence illustrates. I mean, even if you don't. Because I mean, by the end of the movie, it's not an anti-religious film. If anything, it's a pro-religious film. But it kind of is, for lack of a better term, the higher law of Christianity. Yeah. And it just has a beautiful message, a beautiful ending, and the journey you go through. It's long. It is dense, and if you go into that with an open mind, you're going to find some things that are kind of hard to come to terms with. I first saw it kind of towards the end of my journey of deciding to leave the church, like we talked about earlier. And so there were some hard things I had to face, and there's some moments in this film where I'm like, oh shit, I've been that guy before. Like, and I don't like that I was that guy at one point. There are times on my mission that I could definitely identify with Adam Driver's character. I was like, oh shit, like that was me. Like I feel bad that was me. But yeah, I once again can apply to people who aren't Christian as well. I think if you want to dig deep into it, and I think it's a constructive film of the decade for anyone to watch.
Yeah.
It's really good.
To transition once again so poorly into
I'll
something.
say real quick on Silent So You Move. It's what a feel like that movie has. It's long, it's loud. It's almost got the feel, almost like Dunkirk, where you kind of constantly have the ticking and the reverberation and the feeling, and it's so intentional. And then when it cuts and when it does different things, it's so effective. And I think for you to it is insanely effective at helping you to tap into the journey of a person. And it has very few characters and takes a very long time, but that's the space you need to be in touch with those things. And I think it is a movie that very much is visceral and makes you learn and feel. And I really enjoy it. Yeah. I'm happy. Tyler and I saw it in theaters, and I'm kind of happy I was really engulfed in it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember afterwards, like, because we went with Josh,
Yes.
it was the three of us, and I remember just walking out afterwards, and it was like, there's so much to talk about, but you almost didn't want to interrupt. You wanted to just let it sit in your body for a while and run its course.
Which is almost a religious feeling in that, like, you, or even this euphoric feeling that you want to bask in.
Yeah, it's really good.
This did you guys know that Silence is based on a book?
Right.
Yeah.
We studied that book as part of my senior English class at BYU. So I had actually read the book before the movie came out. I think as I was writing a report or whatever, I read the headline that said that Silence is being made into a movie. And just, if you haven't read the book, it's the treatment that Scorsese does from the book to the movie. It's really good.
Interesting.
Just thematically, like, we've been talking themes and stuff like that, like, setting all that aside, like, book to movie, this is a really good one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
What was your other one?
The other one that was my main one was my favorite film of the year, which is Jojo Rabbit.
And this was on, like, 5 of us had, like, a slash where we want.
Yeah.
Oh,
Mine was Slash with The Lighthouse, which we probably won't go into just because for time's sake, but shout out to The Lighthouse real quick. But anyway, Jojo Rabbit, man, what a movie that I was, like, so not sure. The trailer looked like a lot of fun, but I was like, I was unsure what to expect, and I was unsure what Taika Waititi's next film after Ragnarok was going to be. And holy shit, man, like, this is such a good movie. This is a movie that has, for dealing with the subject matter that it deals with, has such a more lighthearted, fun tone, but that doesn't diminish the heavier aspects of it, I feel like. And what a character-driven movie. Like, I think this movie is so good at developing its characters in a natural way that doesn't feel forced, that doesn't feel like, oh, I've got a checkbox, character growth on my list of making a movie. It just happens over the course of the story in a very real, believable, heartfelt way. Performances across the board are fantastic. It's really funny. We talked a little bit about Wes Anderson's influence on this film. It's definitely there without it feeling like it's mimicking a Wes Anderson film.
Yeah.
But kind of paying homage to it in some ways. I fucking love any German being played by a New Zealand person who doesn't bother to change their accent at all will never not be funny. This movie has everything. It's got good one-liners. It's got good longer jokes. It's got it's just wonderful performances and just the way it conveys information and presents the next building block in the story is just so good.
I just remember the thing that got me most excited for this movie was Edgar Wright tweeted about it and was like, Jojo Rabbit has the best used PG-13 fuck of any movie ever. Which is when Jojo he just says, fuck you, Hitler, and kicks him out the window. Like that. I just remember like reading that and be like, okay, yeah, this is going to be, I'm very excited to see what this is. And yeah, I was shocked at the way it navigates its tones. Because it is very heavy. Like the movie itself, there are things that happen in that are incredibly just heartbreaking and horrifying in a way that you should expect something from that time period. You know what I mean? Especially dealing with that. But the way it navigates that, it never feels forced. It never feels like it's forcing an idea on you. And I don't think it ever tries to sugarcoat the way its characters feel to make you like them. Like, there are things that JoJo does that you're just like, you fucking little bastard. Like, what the hell, man? But in the end, like, all of that makes that movie work so well. I think especially even going down to like Sam Rockwell's character and, God damn it, Alfie Allen.
Oh yeah, Theon, my boy.
That minor arc in the background is really incredible. And the way that they flesh out, particularly Sam Rockwell's character by the end, is really, really beautiful and I think really touching. And
it's done effortlessly. I guess you really referenced this, how it never felt like there was a labor for these things to happen.
Yeah.
Same thing with I'm blanking on her name, but the little girl. And when you think about the hilarity of the first 20 minutes of this movie, he's essentially at Nazi Boy Scout camp. And then the tension, not just the breakdown moments with the shoes, but like the tension when she kind of comes out and is pretending to be a sister. It's incredible balance of tones. But some of the jokes, there is a point where you say there has to be an unapologeticness to it, which is a very comedian-like thing to do. There's, firestorms about the different jokes you see on stand-up all the time, and I think this movie made some really bold, funny choices that you have to be able to let go of. But I thought the tone shift, when you really come down to it, is also a little bit how we treat the Holocaust in our culture. I throw around the, like, a strict person's a Nazi or what a Hitler, like, very casually. And my grandmother was Jewish and German at the time, and she did get away, but her family was part of the Holocaust. They did have people taken away. And then I've spent some time in Germany 2 years ago, and then this last summer I was in Sweden, but I spent 2 weeks around a couple of German friends. And I just realized, I was like, I really do say it a lot, and it's an extremely, like, I throw it on very casually. And my grandmother was on trip with us for Thanksgiving recently, and I was like, oh, like, I don't know if she heard me just say, like, what a Nazi, and maybe she doesn't care at this point, but it's this blasé back and forth where, like, well, remember those 6 million we lost. I'm 100% okay with the complete joking and mocking. Not that I'm not Jewish. It's not like I can give any sort of permission to insult whatever it is. But like you said, it had something to say, and it did it in such a clever, genius way with wonderful people, and it was hilarious and touching. And how many movies execute on that many levels?
Yeah.
And I think that's what impressed me so much about it.
Yeah, I even think of just Stephen Merchant's character in this as the
Merchant
SS officer.
Everything.
Yeah. We should talk about his
Also
little
in Fighting
bit
with
in Fighting
My
with My Family, and which he directed. Fucking Stephen Merchant's awesome. But like that whole bit of them every time someone new comes in, everyone howling Hitler again to each other, but then within the next couple minutes, that menace is like immediately back, and it just feels like all those rooms are living. It feels like all those moments are actually happening. Like they really feel alive in ways that I think other comedies that might try to strike a similar tone do not. And it's really an incredible.
Every scene in that movie is almost playing a game within a game of itself.
Yeah.
And it's executed on an extremely high level.
Yeah, I would definitely say this is Taika Waititi's best film.
Yeah.
I in my mind, that like I love all of his other movies, but I think this one's pretty far and ahead his best.
Yeah. We didn't get any of. I don't remember the name of the kid from Hunt for the Wilder People.
I haven't seen him in anything since.
He's in Deadpool too.
Deadpool too, yeah.
But yeah, man. You should definitely, anyone who hasn't seen Hunt for the Wilder People should watch it, because Sam Neill is a great old man too. I didn't expect that.
The chubby kid from JoJo, the best friend, who just delightful coming in and out and carrying around a big rocket launcher and stuff.
They always give each other a hug when they see each other.
It's so sweet.
Good, yeah.
He's going to be in the next Home Alone, and I really hope
That's right.
I hope they have fun. I hope that is an interesting thing where they play with tone.
Rob Delaney and what's her face, Kimmy Schmidt.
Oh,
I think
don't
they're
know.
the parents.
I knew Rob Delaney was.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Ellie Kemper.
Yeah,
That's her name.
I just hope they don't play it safe with that. Not that you have to play it dangerous in Home Alone, but
Right.
let there be this cute, funny, innocent kid just being ridiculous.
Yeah. I hope he has a British accent and his parents don't. Also, please God,
Let it be.
please.
So funny.
Cool. Let's jump forward. We're gonna go to my favorite thing of the decade, which was The Social Network, and that is something that started the decade for us. And this and Friday Night Lights, which are probably two of my favorite pop culture things ever. Like, they're almost too cool now. Maybe that was what I said about Fleabag too. Like, I don't want to be a hipster, but like, no movie has ever left me as exhilarated as this, and for such a blend of reasons. And now it is on a lot of like decade end lists. You know, it might be behind some bigger ones or some little favorites from a writer, but it is a lot of people at the peak of their powers. It was Jesse Eisenberg when he was still kind of evolving and maybe hadn't settled into doing what he's going to keep doing. Not that he's not talented, but there's certainly like a flavor to him. We're talking about freaking the best Sorkin and the best Fincher that's of course my opinion, but everything I've seen them do in other things where his writing is so talky and quick and impactful, and then Fincher, he's grinding through these takes and so visual. Like, he does so many VFX shots when you would have no idea that VFX was involved. And I just think Andrew Garfield has become one of my favorite actors. Justin Timberlake, absolutely, like, they shoehorned a pop star into something that worked so well for someone who has done some very rocky acting up and down. And
He was in a Rocky movie?
it's Creed 9.
Creed 9, it's Justin Timberlake now, finally.
Well, see, Creed's going to have an opponent, and Justin Timberlake's going to be his kid, and it's going to... Justin Timberlake's already 40. Anyway, I just... it's so well written. It's so fun. It's interesting because Facebook, this came out in 2010, Facebook was at the peak of its powers, but it was nowhere near the downfall that, Facebook is still impactful, but it's so much more, we're wary of it because of our information and Mark Zuckerberg and things he's done. That around this time, people were like, Mark Zuckerberg should run for president. And Facebook from, started in 2003, it was really wide. 06, 07 is when it just exploded. And there's talk, and I hope they don't do it, but there's a talk of a sequel trying to find an event within how Facebook has mishandled everything to bring these two creators back together. And I don't think it'll happen. But this actually, if you watch it back and think about that man and how he is, it's a portrayal, and how much effect Facebook has and how much the processing of information has in our world. Like, we just hear now how about Facebook and WhatsApp and Twitter affect wars and uprisings and elections. It is crazy to think that like this little visceral explosion of a technological company did it. So like that has kind of reopened my eyes. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not someone who like is freaking out about Russia. Not that there's no merit there, but it is so interesting to see what Facebook has become, and the way this movie, it doesn't keep you on edge, but there is a kinetic feel to it. And that's because of the dialogue and the really great camera work, and you're jumping between the lawsuits and the main storyline. But I just can't think of something that I love the music. I love the performances. I love the production work. Like, and this, not that awards matter, but it lost to the King's Speech, which I adore. But come on, give me a break.
Someone give Tom Hooper, I don't know, a
Tom Hooper
camera
just did
lesson.
Cats, so let's rescind everything we've ever given to Tom Hooper.
It is one of the movies that I mentioned along with Scott Pilgrim and Inception. That was one of the few that I watched with a giant amount of them that I was like, that is fucking good.
Yeah.
Like, this is, and like coming from
Cats?
David Fincher. No.
But in 2010 he was watching just the film Broadway,
the record, yes.
where the dicks on the people were human, not cats.
But yeah, no, coming from David Fincher and like his previous work, it was not something I was expecting. When I saw his name attached to it, I was like, whoa, that was kind of a shock. But you can definitely feel it there, and it's used in such a good way. It like, you think of David Fincher directing a biopic about Facebook, you're like, oh, is it going to be raining all the time? Or are we going to find like just pictures of people posting pictures of like, orgies that have turned into murders? Like,
is there going to be a face in a box at some point?
Yeah, but like,
yes, a profile.
I mean, all of the other ones are like about such perverse subject matter that like, this was such an interesting choice, I feel like, and it was a phenomenal success of, if that was an experiment or whatever it was, it landed really well. I love that movie.
Yeah.
And like who you root for in this movie and where you want things to like, the way it makes you feel and the way it then settles in from those and the one-liners that it has, it's just, this movie is just insanely up my alley.
And then, it did spawn, the highly more successful, I would say, episode of Letterkenny Fart Book.
Gosh.
Where they literally just one character rips the entire all of one character's lines that episode are just from that movie. It's just
which
directly
is
ripped.
actually incredible and makes that episode watchable.
Yeah, that episode's not very good.
Otherwise, holy shit.
Eventually, you hit your fart humor.
Yeah.
All right.
I like how they also only made one pass at the idea of what fart book would be, which is literally just a way to share your farts with everyone. And they're like, "Is there something different?" No, I think we nailed it. That's it. That's the best
You get
possible
3
joke.
farts. And,
Yeah. Gosh.
All right, Tyler. We are going forward to your wild card.
Yeah. For the decade. I mean, a big theme of this episode has been leaving a church, and many times when you do that, you find another. I am going to talk to you about professional wrestling. I'm talking that WWE shit because for some reason, some people might think you're actually talking about wrestling, which is far more that's insane to me that anyone's talking about wrestling. So my journey to wrestling has been long and slow. And because of that, it's like I'm in a trap now that I cannot climb out of.
did this start because of the Beastcast?
No, it did not. But that was definitely a help towards it. But so for me, it started because of a podcast, because of Radiolab. Radiolab has a great episode called The Montreal Screwjob, which is about a very pivotal moment in wrestling history where the consequences of what happened in the ring actually had $1 million implications outside of the ring. And so for me, it was like, holy shit, wrestling is a fascinating thing. Like it's this incredible cultural phenomenon, like for it to be able to affect things and what it is. And then that turned into me realizing, and I think I've shared this analogy with everyone at this table at some point, but coming to the realization that wrestling is modern day Shakespeare. It is literally, it is theater for the people. It is made for the common man. And it's tales of heroes versus villains. It is tales of people who are more than men. And maybe only slightly less than gods. But
I'd just like to say that a couple weeks ago, Tyler came over to my place to watch First Reformed. But before we watched First Reformed, which is a very heavy movie, we watched a couple hours of wrestling. And it was great. And he explained to me the lore behind it. He told me who was who. You know, I got to see Jungle Boy. I got to see... Who else were we watching?
The Lucha Brothers.
The Lucha Brothers.
Luchasaurus is a very important player.
It was excellent.
So are you strictly WWE or do you branch out into...
So, okay, here's the thing. So, again, a little while ago, kind of on this journey, like I really did, like going into this, I tricked myself into believing it was this academic pursuit. So a little while ago, I actually did, I think it was like probably a year ago. It was when we were podcasting, because I remember
the day you're like, I'm going to do the 1 month free trial and just really see what this is about.
But
mostly I'm watching Japanese stuff, okay?
Yes, exactly. So I was watching, I got I still have not given the WWE any money. I got the free 30-day trial and I watched the hits. I watched every Ultimate Warrior promo, which if you do not know who the Ultimate Warrior is, YouTube the Ultimate Warrior, because holy shit. I watched the infamous 1998 Undertaker versus Mankind Hell in a Cell. I watched a bunch of Macho Man Randy Savage stuff because he's the greatest. And I watched some recent stuff, but I just remember I watched like the most current, like WrestleMania, and I was like, I don't really think there's a whole lot here for me. But I did really get into Japanese wrestling, and particularly a wrestler named Kenny Omega, who this year has now started his own wrestling promotion, and they're like kind of directly challenging WWE. They're hiring their performers and actually giving them benefits instead of just hiring them as independent contractors and being like, oh, your brain fell out? Well, hope you saved some money, bitch. Like WWE does. But anyways, I love wrestling, like kind of unironically at this point. And the thing I love about it is that it is ridiculous. It is serious. It is like wrestling does not work if if the people who are wrestling think it's a joke. It is not a joke. You know what I mean? They are playing ridiculous characters, but it's just a really delightful thing. And for me, I really do feel like, especially for me, like I'm watching NJPW, which is New Japan Pro Wrestling, and AEW, which is All Elite Wrestling, which is a new one. Anyways, they both, to me, serve as these really interesting, because they're not the WWE and they're not really locked into doing anything any specific way. They're like, you like to wrestle and your character's that you're an alien? Fucking come over here and let's throw you in here with this guy who's a Tyrannosaurus Rex who has an English degree. You know, like, let's see what happens. But
who's the guy who always keeps his hands in his pockets?
Oh, that's Orange Cassidy. Yeah, that's the other thing is there's a million wonderful characters. Orange Cassidy is the coolest motherfucker in WWE. Never loses his cool. But yeah, it really is like this, especially AEW, at least so far, has been this thing where it's just such an inviting and open place. And because of that, you have guys like Kenny Omega who are unironically considered like the greatest wrestler in the world right now, like probably the best wrestling entertainer in the world right now, who can come out, who can do an entire wrestling promo based around screens from Undertale and come out dressed up as Sans from Undertale. Like, that is the level of just like niche stuff that people can pull from. And I just love it. It's this, it brings together the parts I like most about sports, which for me, sometimes I love watching sports. I don't always. I love watching sports documentaries. To me, that is like the real magic of like sports, is how it intersects with everything. And wrestling is basically doing that by being like, we're a reality show that's totally made up. But also when we go in that ring, we're really going to fuck ourselves up for your enjoyment. Like, we're going to hit each other with barbed wire bats and be totally buds off stage, but that's what we're going to do. Anyways, I fucking love wrestling. Talk to me about wrestling. If anyone wants to.
Tyler literally just puts it out there into the universe.
I literally did that the other day, yeah.
I just want to talk about it.
My favorite is the background you chose. So he posted on Facebook saying, I need to talk to someone about wrestling. Please talk to me about wrestling. But the background he chose was a bunch of flames, which was the same day that the Australian fires were getting a lot of... So literally, his posts were sandwiched in between two tragic stories about a nation burning to death. And then Tyler's like, hey, I'll hop on this train.
Let me tell you, the only other options for cool backgrounds on Facebook are ski lifts. That's it. That's all you're gonna give me. Oh, and then like cactuses, and I was like, "Fuck that." But yeah, I will say, if you want to get into wrestling, just YouTube some shit. You'll know really fast if you give a shit, and if you do, it's really fun. If not, it's still really fun.
How much are you watching?
So I, over the last few weeks, I've been watching a lot because I want to get current with AEW, which has been a weekly show now for 3 months. Mm-hmm. So I've probably watched around 20 hours of wrestling over the last 3 weeks. And now I'm watching a little bit less, because now I'm just watching the weekly show. But I'm probably going to get a WWE subscription and start watching a lot of older stuff. Because now I'm just fascinated by the cultural aspects of it, because the history of wrestling is actually incredibly fascinating, and not only in terms of wrestling history itself, but in the history of America and corporations. Like, the business side of wrestling is really fucking
There's some really good documentaries like about the WWF and WCW and everything.
Yeah.
I really like looking at wrestling from an outside perspective, and I watched it for probably 3 or 4 years as a kid, but we did not have cable, and I could not watch the pay-per-view, so it was like I was watching what was on UPN at the time, SmackDown, and there were some other ways that I had some friends, and it engulfs so many people, and I'm like really happy I understand the charm, but I'm also a little bit of a completionist, which I know you kind of are too.
Yeah.
And so to me, I was like, I want to consume it all. So the people I know who watch wrestling, and I have a really good podcast I'm going to recommend to you,
cool,
called The Masked Man Show, and he's someone who he does a media podcast. So it's about watching the media. He's a media member who covers the media, and then the other one he does is about Westworld, the HBO show that we all hate. But one of the most interesting people, and he really does a good job of articulating why like grown men who also may appreciate sports or good storytelling also like this mix of sports and soap opera and this whole world of it. And it's fascinating. It's big money. It's like you said, there's so many interesting stories just within it. But if you are watching, NXT, SmackDown, Raw, AEW classics, actually one of the biggest podcasters in the world is this guy who has 4 wrestling podcasts, and he started from nothing, and it's grown into more than a full-time job. He does a live show a month and is just killing it. And he has all these. He just pretty much all of them look back at wrestling in different ways every week. None of it is about current wrestling, and yet he's one of the most listened to podcasters in the world.
Yeah,
so it's a fascinating world.
Really?
But
Really I mean, I've only seen like bits and pieces, like very short clips. This week alone, I don't even know how must have been on like a Reddit post or something. I've seen apparently where a man faked his own death and came out of a coffin at a match to compete in the match. I've seen a man fake.
I mean, the Undertaker's done that 3 or 4 times.
A broken leg, where he comes to the ring and he has his leg up in a cast. He has a blanket over. He rips off the blanket and it's a fake leg, and then he jumps in the ring.
Fucks people up. Yeah,
I'm like, holy shit! I might be able to get into that. I feel like I would need to see just like the best ofs.
Yeah.
But then you miss like a lot of the backstory, like you're talking about. So I'm like,
I mean, that's true to a point. Like that's honestly why one of the things I love about AEW starting this year is because I get to kind of start on the ground floor of that. And even with that, there's a ton of backstory because a lot of these people are coming from New Japan, and are kind of carrying over personas from there. But anyways, yeah, but I will say I'm going to be purchasing a pay-per-view at the end of February. Everyone's invited.
Cool, yeah.
We should have a party.
I'll have big boards with all the characters. I'll explain why you should give a shit about everyone, and then we'll just fucking have a really good time.
WWE taught me, one, how to root for a villain, how to be like okay with like this is a bad guy, but I'm very interested in, especially when someone turns heel, as they say, and kind of goes bad. Like I love this tag team called Christian and Edge, and they were young, and then they like evolve to where they're independent wrestlers. They break up, they fight 10 times, like. It's like a relationship. You break up and stuff over and over again, and it's so fun. It's fascinating. Once you get invested in one character, and especially now that we have the whole history of wrestling is now written online and viewable online through this app, it's pretty cool. Anyway, we'll move forward. Marcus, tell us about your favorite Korean movie of the year. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we can Marcus a very specific.
Well, I'm gonna be talking about Parasite, but I'm more interested to hear your guys' opinions.
I'm fucking bummed I haven't seen this yet. Like,
you haven't seen it yet?
Because it's fucking nowhere. You can't see it anywhere.
You just missed the window.
Yeah.
That sucks. That always sucks. There's that gap where it's not in theaters and
this
then
one's
it's not
worse
on
for some reason, though. I think because
I think it stuck around so much longer than anyone expected it to.
It was at 16 in Salt Lake for quite a while.
Yeah,
but
it was there for a long time.
I'll lay out the basis for this. The first thing, you're with this family who clearly they're working together, working odd jobs, figuring out how to earn money, and they only have cell phone service in this one little part of their house, and you're thrown right into their daily life, and it's a lot of fun. And then one of them gets a job doing some service for doing a service for a wealthy family, and then he's trying to help his family get other jobs and do something similar, and it deals with class. It deals with insecurities. It just runs the gambit, and it makes you feel so much tension and interest, and then it explodes. And it's really just about 3 different families and the way their lives end up intersecting. And I'm trying to make it like interesting but confusing enough for Tyler.
Yeah, should I leave so you guys can like openly talk about it? Because like I really don't want to spoil it for me. So I
definitely want to talk openly about some of this stuff.
I can totally go upstairs real quick.
Cool. I'll text you when we're finishing up.
I haven't seen it either.
Oh shit.
We can
talk without you handling it for just.
We can.
Yeah, we'll be quick too.
Oh my gosh, the anal sex scene was so good.
This is more of a production I was hoping it was going to be. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
So I do want to talk about, before we just get into the spoilers, I think that we've talked a lot about film marketing and with some other things of like where it's maybe marketed incorrectly. This movie I feel like was marketed perfectly. I don't think it showed scenes from later in the movie, but they were so out of context. You didn't really know what it was.
Yes.
And so much of the trailer is from the first 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And just being in the theater, like, there's a certain amount of like uneasiness that comes from being like, I think I've seen everything I saw in the trailer, which is a dumb thing to think, but I totally thought that, and I was like, I have no fucking idea where this movie's gonna go, and I'm really excited. And I haven't I haven't felt that.
I actually went in without seeing the trailer.
Oh, cool.
I had seen the
Really?
poster, which is just of two people standing there. Their eyes are covered in a
Striking
black
poster, yeah.
And I had heard it was Parasite. I thought it was like an invasion, like someone was going to parasite and control someone. I thought it was a horror movie, but I knew it was like on more of a thriller realism level.
Yeah.
And so I was just, once the third member of the family gets a job, I was just delighted.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
the thing is you think the movie's about one thing,
Yeah.
and then it ends up being about
And it
something
turns a
completely
couple
different.
times.
Yeah.
Because you get the classism getting the jobs and them almost just trying to screw over this richer family. And then when the family leaves, there's so much tension. Because you're worried they're going to get caught. You know what's going to happen. It's almost too easy. And that's where the genius is when the next turn comes in, when she comes back. Of course, when her husband's revealed, but just her even coming back.
Are we going full
Yeah,
spoilers?
yeah.
Oh, yeah. If
All
you
right,
haven't
okay.
seen this, skip ahead a few minutes.
Yeah.
Until
Live
you
your
hear
life.
Tyler or Justin's voice.
Live your own life. If you don't give a shit, it's fine too. Like, whatever. But I will say that the reveal of that room underneath the house and that man is living there was one of the most shocking and disturbing things I've seen in a movie this year. And I think for me, probably the most disturbing moment in this movie
I know exactly
is
the moment.
when the family does come back early from their camping trip, and Mr. Park, that's the name of the family knows him by, the dad of the family is down with the man who's been living in the basement, who's tied up, and uses his forehead to activate the lights on the stairs as the owner of the home is coming up. Just blood streaming down, and him just slamming his head into these buttons. It was incredibly affecting to me. And like, I feel like this movie is a movie that's about class and capitalism in a way that I don't know if I've seen anyone else handle those topics so deftly, where it's so in your face, but it's so obscured, and it still tells an incredibly engrossing story. But there's no way to misinterpret what that movie's about.
No,
You know what I mean?
I love the visual storytelling aspect of.
Some of those shots using that window in that room are incredible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That house is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, even just the destinations and where people live. You know, you have the high class people who live on this beautiful hill in this home. You know, even it literally shows you have to walk up to this home. It's high up, and then the family that we're following, they live in like a mid. Basement
It's a big thing in Korea called a semi-basement.
A semi-basement. That's what it is, where they're partway underground, but they're not completely underground. And then you have the next level of the people living underground in the basement. It just...
And did you notice, too, when they were running home that night when they finally get free, they sprint down a ton of stairs to get to their part of town.
Yeah.
And I've been to Seoul, and I was staying in a hostel, and it was kind of up a hill, and then we went up a little further. I was kind of getting a tour of the area, and I started seeing these really nice houses, very similar to this. And a lot of them had gates, they had buzzers, and my friend served an LDS mission there, and she just said, you go to these wealthy houses, and you kind of knew you're going to buzz, and there was going to be nothing. Like, just you're going to be ignored. And so that felt so real to me. And I found out later on, the director did an interview, Bong Joon-ho, who before this, my only reference point was the train movie.
Snowpiercer.
Snowpiercer. Same. That was
But,
the only one I had seen.
He said everything was a built stage except for the exterior shot of those stairs.
Wow.
So the neighborhood right outside of
What?
the house was like exterior built, so it looked that
That's
way, and then digitally
amazing.
done. And the house is all a soundstage. The basement, they literally did have to flood a set, and
No way.
so it's
That is cool.
The amount of technical storytelling, and he pretty much said, he's like, they gave me a lot of money to make this movie, and I used it all.
That's awesome.
But you're right, like you can't misrepresent the feeling, but it also adds in the positive gray areas and the negative areas, and it is just
Well, and everyone,
so visceral.
I feel like everyone is portrayed genuinely and accurately. There's no necessarily, well, there's, yeah, I don't know. Like a lot of times I feel like things like this, they try to paint like the rich people as dicks or whatever, but they're just people and they're living their lives how they would live their lives. And same with everybody else.
They do a good job of demonstrating the ignorance that comes from that. And then the assholery. Like, the dad does some things that are straight up like, what a piece of shit.
But he has a pretty good relationship with his son too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It really is. They are fully realized characters. They're flawed, but they're real.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I will say, so the movies I actually know Bong Joon-ho from are Mother and Memories of a Murder, which you guys should definitely check out. They're like straight up kind of thrillers.
Another Mother?
Yes. Mother without an exclamation mark.
Okay.
But I could totally see that in he uses these like thriller tropes and like everything to tell this story in such an incredibly like well-paced way that is so incredible. And the performances of the main family, those four in particular, like I love the everyone in that movie is really great, but that core family, they are so incredible. And even just the way that you see so many different aspects of their relationships with each other, and it's really great.
Effortless
So
character development once again.
Sure.
Interesting. It reminded me of a Japanese movie. Wait, was it Japanese? Shoplifters?
Yes,
that came out last year.
Yeah.
It was kind of similar. It was not actually related family that was stealing or doing different things to stay alive, and their dynamic and their interest. And that one was a little bit more realistic, but it was almost 1/3 of this movie. It was almost
for sure.
just seeing their aspects, maybe 1.5 of if you look at this as 3 levels.
Yeah.
And it just puts you in that mindset that like what kind of person you're going to be and how full can we make these characters, and it's
interesting because I feel like those movies come to different conclusions too about things, and they're about different things, and but they are.
But it's using a lot of the same imagery and ideals and dynamics. Both, of course, for our purposes, just being from the US and having a fairly narrow perspective when it comes to it, also telling that universal story, both from Asian countries that we're less familiar with. So, we can bring back the non-parasites.
Yeah, let's bring them back.
Did you have anything else spoiler you want to say?
Not spoilery, but I was just gonna say that I was surprised at how fucking funny that movie was.
Oh,
there are parts that are genuinely hilarious,
and it's the most genius, realistic humor that you would come across in those situations. And then I do want to say real quick as they're coming down, it's almost Tarantino-esque in the ending, but more in a thriller vibe than a Tarantino vibe, and. I think that the way that's in the trailer, that does frustrate me because I'm like, I'd want to not know that it's going to go. It's just going to end. The maze of heading down, and the uncertainty that brings. Oh man, it haunts me. But that's the kind of thrill that I want.
Yeah, it's really great.
I'm going to just jump in too because I'm going to be the last subject, and so for my.
Hey guys, we finished up.
Yeah. So for my wild card, not on purpose, meta. We're gonna close it down talking about podcasts.
I will say you chose this not on purpose, but I did put it as the last thing on purpose.
That makes a lot.
Sure, yeah.
When you put it there, I was like, that made a lot of sense. I want to make one other quick thing that I almost made my wild card, and that's the theatrical experience because it's dying out a little. And I will say, while I need to put my phone away more during movies like Marriage Story and The Irishman, which are both on I saw on Netflix, I could have seen them in theaters. I just want to shout out some of my top theater-going experiences from the decade because it's important to me that we still have that opportunity, and I don't want it to be too niche. I get that it may not be as domineering, but what is the movie with A Quiet Place? Because literally full theater, everyone's on pins and needles. I talk about this all the time and I get mocked for it, but Girls Trip, I've never been in a theater with that much laughter. And it was Tiffany Haddish really exploding onto the scene. And she's like a big player now, whatever you think of some of her movies. And then Fast 7, because it's just a hoot. And but it's loud and it's actiony, so it's nice to see it on an IMAX screen. It's nice to see that it's big and exciting. So it's fun for the action and the sound, but also everybody, like, it's funny. And then everybody, I don't know, everyone in the theater I was in was really crying when the whole Paul Walker thing happens at the end. And there were a couple others that were on my list, but I just wanted to shout out the theatrical experience. Like, I think laughing with people, being scared with people, and then also using the technology that we have, like in Dolby Atmos and IMAX, like, that is an experience that's worth paying for. And I think we're going to consume media in different ways, and there's some movies it doesn't matter where I see them, but I want that to continue to be an opportunity, because right now it's kind of just like movies in theaters are getting pushed out. It's a lot more blockbusters or a lot more IP, and I want more different movies that can give us those types of experience, getting money and being able to experience them communally.
I agree, and I love the fact that you have to pay attention. Like, when
Yes.
you go to the movies,
Yes.
you have to be there, and you have to be present. You know, when you're watching a movie at home, you know, you can get up and you can pause the movie and get up and get something to eat or go to the bathroom or whatever, but when you're in the theater, you have to be in it.
Yeah. Well, and I think the one I think from this decade is a movie that I saw in theaters with I think everyone in this room actually, is Mandy.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing that in the theater was a very important way to experience that movie, I think. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, I need to make sure that people see it before it's gone, because it's like you're not going to get a lot of chances to see.
Did we all
this
see that
ridiculous
together?
movie. Yeah, I think the four of us did.
Yeah.
I don't think
I was invited. I didn't make it. I was
but
trying
we
to
did go to
get
the-
laid. But Tyler and I actually went to. They re-showed it in the tower just a couple months ago.
Yeah, the midnight
and we saw
late night tower movie.
We've seen a few movies. We saw Wet Hair American Summer in that theater, and then we saw Mad Max Fury Road, but in black and white.
Oh yeah.
But you know, that theater does that. It just because that's the Tower Theater, and then you have like these Fathom events where they show Godfather 2 again in theaters. And there are a couple of movies where you've said, "Oh, I want to see that in a theater," and I think it's it's worth it to
saw
me.
Alien this year, which was really cool.
The first time I ever cussed out a stranger was at a movie theater. And
you never would have had that experience. Who knows
she
if
was
you would have had
dressed
cussed
as
someone.
Umbridge from Harry Potter. It was at Harry Potter number 5.
And she decided to dress as Umbridge?
Yes.
That fucking
So it was
bitch.
pretty cathartic for me. We had a pretty big group, and whatever theater we saw it on, the seats were really close together. And so, like, if you're a taller person, your knees are touching the seat. She apparently doesn't register this, so in the middle of the fucking movie, stands up and starts yelling at a guy in our group that his legs are touching her chair, and he keeps kicking it. And he's, like, trying to explain to her, and she's just not having it. And everyone's just kind of awkwardly sitting there. So I stood up, and I locked Umbridge eye to eye. I was like...
You put your hand in
I
the
was
square.
I was a teenager. I was so nervous. I was shaking, but I was so mad. I was like... Bitch, some of us are trying to watch a fucking movie.
That brings great joy to my
And
soul.
everyone clapped.
It was a mixed reception of my standing up for everyone. Some people were really happy. Some people were like, watch the language. There's children here. I'm like, well, fuck them.
Fuck them.
I got to say real quick before we move on to podcast.
that's a
Controversial
great
opinion
story.
to hold
Yeah.
in 2019.
I'm
by
glad
the way.
that story happened. I went and saw Uncut Gems in my hometown of beautiful Aurora, Colorado over Christmas, and a fight started to break out. And a transient man, as we may say, a man suffering from homelessness, as we have to say, was tripping on drugs for sure. And all of a sudden, he gets up and he goes, "Man, fuck AMC."
I mean, okay,
I agree.
I
agree with him.
I'm with you so far.
I was at a theater called. This is actually the theater where the Dark Knight shooting happened. So like, I'm freaking out
shit.
because I'm like, if this dude, I was a little worried. So I stand up and turn to the side, but he's like, F Century 16, everything like that, and people are like, no, get out, we're not dealing with this. And him and this guy kind of start to go at it, and I'm like, I'm trying to watch Adam Sandler. He only does this once a decade. Oh, come on. But then this dude gets up and he's just like, if y'all don't get out of the theater right now, I'm going to shove my foot so far up your ass, that sort of thing. And like legitimate, it's not a well-off area that where this theater is. It's not necessarily in the ghetto, but certainly when I first heard about the Dark Knight shooting, I was with Tyler when I heard it, and I thought it was a gang shooting because it's in a gang activity area. So anyway, I was in this theater, these two started going at, I'm like, I went to the edge of the door just so I could have a view down the stairs of what was happening. And then I was just ready to hit that exit.
That's the best story I've ever heard. I thought mine was going to be the top one for sure, but that was
It reminded me that I I told my sister on the way home, I was like, I don't think I've told anyone that, like, that doesn't happen in a theater much.
No.
Like, straight up, there's a fight, but, like,
And especially that, I've also been to that
yeah,
theater.
big dudes get up and are like, we're not having this. We were trying to watch a movie.
I will say, probably the most on-brand thing that could happen during a showing of Uncut Gems is just two people getting in a shouting match.
That's a fact.
Never has a
To
movie
be honest,
felt more like that experience.
I probably
You
wouldn't
fit
have
right
even
in.
noticed. Like, two people shouting in the theater, I was just like, oh, it's part of the movie,
Oh,
because
it's
that's all the
KG's
movie
cronies.
Oh, they're also here for Adam Sandler to just continue to talk over.
Kevin Garnett was there.
Anyway, my number one wild card was podcasts. We're, of course, doing a podcast. What a transition.
And why
Contrary
does
to popular belief, yes.
And why does yours have to be the number one wild card? Our wild cards weren't good enough for
That's
you?
damn right, okay? No one cares about your soul. Okay, so the first podcast I had ever heard of was called it was Mugglecast. It's a Harry Potter podcast. And here's how old they were talking. iPhones weren't out, but iPods were. I thought you had to have an iPod, so I would read the transcribed version of these hour-long Harry Potter podcasts. This is how into Harry Potter I was. And finally I learned, I can just play it through QuickTime as a video, but it'll play the audio. And that was fun. I didn't actually stick with them, but then I probably didn't listen to podcasts for years. Mm-hmm. Now today, podcasts, you have news podcasts, you have movie and TV podcasts are huge, but narrative podcasts are something I actually have not gotten into. And there's like fiction ones, there's true crime ones, which is probably one of the biggest subgenres. But we consume, and we've always listened to audio. We've always done things like driving and doing things where you have to listen to audio, whether it be music or radio. And I'm a big sports fan. I went to school to be a sports broadcaster, and I still do that in some capacity and did it full time for quite a while. And so I was listening to sports podcasts like people would have listened to sports radio. And I knew how to edit audio and video, and I did a sports podcast for a while. But now, like, I personally use Stitcher on Android, and I love it. I always have a ton of what I'd call evergreen podcasts in my queue about things I'm interested in. And then there's weekly ones. Like, if I'm in the heat of the NBA season, I'm into it. Like, I like to listen to some different podcasts. I like interview podcasts a lot. Shouts to Armchair Expert. Bill Simmons is a great interviewer, and he talks basketball a lot. But I listen to it. Literally too many podcasts. And, like, if you love something and you find people, like, I like Survivor and I like The Bachelor, and I don't know that many people around me who I can have interesting conversations about that with. But I've tried podcasts about those and they've sucked. And then I found people I like, and it's like talking to your friends. And that's why we do this, because we already Tyler and I literally made a friendship out of sitting at our dumbass job and talking about movies and TV for hours. Yeah. And then we started going to see movies, and that made us. We had a lot of fun. Like, of course, we want to make fun of things, and maybe we want to be involved in the medium in a different way. But podcasting is a great entry-level thing. And while we have a better setup now, like much more professional, there are some great things you can do to block out sound and record it to your phone if you've got a good phone and a good microphone you can attach it to. And so it's a medium for everyone. You can find a podcast about anything you want. I would say there's too many. It sucks. There's money in it. Like, I do want to say one quick...
What?
Not for us. But so when podcasts first came out, ESPN didn't know how to monetize them. So if Subway wanted to sponsor something, they would say, hey, we're also going to throw in like a presenting sponsorship on one of our podcasts. That podcast started getting 100,000 listens a week. And the person, this is Bill Simmons, who's a huge sports figure, and mileage may vary on him, but he was like, what in the hell are you doing not charging someone to pay for this? And now podcasts have advertisers, they have Patreons, there's a lot of different ways, but the way it's grown, like in 2010, how many people had heard of it? Or there was that little icon on your iPhone by 2015. It still wasn't really there. And then we get our serials, then we get our comedian. Every comedian and their freaking mom has a podcast. But it's like TV and movies at this point, but it's grown so much faster than those because of the digital age and what it's come in. And like, I have so much fun listening to them. I'm so glad like I get to sit with my buds every week and talk about shit into a microphone. I just think podcasts have had this huge effect. The New York Times has The Daily, which is a huge podcast people listen to catch up on the news every day. And it's so much more efficient than radio, because we saw radio, then we saw like XM radio, which I'm actually just now learning really how interesting and how that works and why it's still successful. And And yeah, so shouts to podcasts. I think it has changed. It has been insanely impactful upon us. But yeah, go
honestly,
ahead, guys.
like I got really into podcasts probably in 2013, and there are podcasts from then that I still listen to. I mean, I got really into Harmontown, which is Dan Harmon's podcast, and I listen to that every week until it ended a month ago, which is a weird
ended?
thing. Yeah, it's over
Oh.
now. And so I just started listening from the beginning again because I can't
so cool.
fucking break from the routine, which is a personal problem I'm working through.
Dude,
in
last
therapy.
black man in San Francisco. Just let go. Move on.
But anyways, it really is such a great medium. And like I said, like a podcast is what got me into wrestling. Like just a podcast about a story from 20 years ago about wrestling. And again, it's one of those things where like it's cool to have an excuse, especially as we get older and it's harder like to get together every week and all be watching the same thing and be able to talk about it. Like it really is really cool. But yeah, I love podcasts.
I love podcasts. The first podcast I ever started listening to was How Did This Get Made, which is with Paul Scheer and Jason Mantzoukas, and they just talk about shitty movies, and it's so funny. I don't remember how I found it, or but that's what got me through working an office job.
Seriously, seriously, it saved my life in office jobs for sure.
And that's the thing with podcasts is it really got me into the audio format. Like audio is incredible because you can be listening to something and experiencing something while you're doing something else, while you're working, while you're driving. I think podcasts actually really got me into audiobooks. Which is kind of funny because audiobooks have been around longer than podcasts. But because of that, like, I am never not listening. If I'm in my car, I don't listen to a lot of music in my car anymore. I am always listening to either a podcast or an audiobook.
I will say podcasts have drastically reduced the amount of music I listen to. You guys are much bigger music people than I am, period. So maybe I was already prone to that. But like, if I'm listening, I'm like, oh, I have a free minute where I'm doing something like we would design things on a computer, or I'm driving. Like, I'm not a great multitask focuser, but like when I have to clean something, I really look forward to it because I'm like, I can really get down on podcasts. And I don't know if you guys would say, I listen on double time now. I'm like, I got used
man,
really?
you're a power user.
so-
I don't think I can ever graduate to
and
that.
I never.
No.
So you guys know, I always have like 10
1.5
podcasts in my
as
queue.
high as I can go.
It started with Game of Thrones. I listened to the books, and the guy just drones. So
Those suck ass.
I'll
say
it
that.
up.
Those
Yeah, his
audiobooks-
are not good.
Yeah, they're not
So
good.
I turned it up to double, and then there are some accents where it's hard, but there's people I just got used to listening to them double time, and now pretty much anything I can listen to in double time, which is like on one hand a talent, on the other hand like I'm ashamed. But if you get in my car and my Bluetooth goes on, it's like. Oh, by the way, shouts to Game of Thrones. That would have been a big part of this podcast if they didn't fuck up the last 2 years. The first 2 seasons of that are probably the best thing of the first 6 seasons, best thing of this decade. We did a whole podcast on it. Go listen.
My favorite thing of the decade so far is hearing Mitchell be that pissed off about the last 2 seasons. Because I don't think I've seen you that angry. Because you were definitely the less like
Offended.
excitable. Yeah.
And I haven't done a full 180 where I'm like that
Right,
angry.
yeah.
Like they did follow the beats I wanted. I wish there was more time to flesh it out, and there are merit to it. But when
You're
I look
angry
back,
about what could have been.
yeah, when I see how mad people are at the end of Star Wars, I'm like, you know what? I can relate because Cursed Child and the last couple seasons of Game of Thrones are shit. George, please release the last 2 books before you die. We went off the rails a little bit there. Podcasts are great.
Yeah, you're the one that got me in podcasts, Tyler. I don't listen to them anymore, really, to be honest, because my job does not allow me to at this point.
Allow you like it's the rules, or you're too busy?
Too busy. I answer a lot of questions. I'm the guy they go to for when sales reps call who are pissed.
We do the same, or we did the same thing. I do some different, but we both designed solar proposals, and literally I like aged out of. I mean, luckily I get paid way more now, but I literally like grew out of being able to listen to podcasts. Which is I'm like,
I
would
can't
I
listen
take
to that
half
work anymore
Would I
either.
take half the money so I could listen to podcasts? No, it is.
But yeah, and I love music so much that like when I draw, that's what I listen to, and so it's like it's hard for me to actually listen to podcasts and draw at the same time, which is weird. I can listen to music and do it, and I actually get more out of music when I draw. But video game podcasts were the big ones, and like obviously I host a podcast in my basement.
Yeah.
It's a big part of my life at this point. I feel like I have homework when I need to watch the movies that you guys are all raving about, and I feel left out, and I have to catch up on. so we can talk about them. And this is I love being able to do this, and I love talking about this. And you're the only people in my life that I can really talk to about like this stuff on this level. I try to talk to people at work about it, and then people are like, "Oh man, you like the new Castlevania series?" I'm like, "No." They're like, "Oh, why not?" I'm like, "The writing's really bad," and they're like, "Oh yeah, the writing's really bad, but it looks really cool." So yeah, thanks guys for.
So does porn, but it's like. Anyways, do you know what?
Double time that.
Oh, I do. I have to if I want to see the end.
The stamina.
Jesus. That being said, we will have another episode. We'll be back to our normal format next week. We're going to have, correct me if I'm wrong, Shane Siegel
Is next week the 12th?
on. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, as of now, you'll be listening to this on the 13th or something. Anyways,
My
our
semi-famous
next episode-
brother-in-law, Shane Siegel, was
Yeah.
going to be on
and
talking about anime.
Yeah, we'll be watching Perfect Blue, right?
Yep.
By Satoshi Kon, which is an interesting movie, and I'm excited to bust it out. Marcus, thanks so much for joining us again.
Happy
it's
to-
a
happy to
pleasure
be
to have
here.
you when we do, and hopefully we'll have you plenty more times. I'm sure we will.
Definitely.
If I have to tie you up and make you, I
That's how
fucking
Tyler
will.
gets everything done.
I've been watching a lot of wrestling.
Tyler, tell people how they can find us online if they want to give us feedback beyond the show. Talk to us, whatever.
Reach out to us at our email at rewatchersonthepod@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at rewatcherspod, or call Mitchell on his cell phone at 801-236-5243. Is that right?
You got the last digit wrong, and we're happy that way. Okay.
We got 9 other options.
Oh, crap.
And everyone's got unlimited minutes at this point, so put in the work.
Yeah. If you're listening to this, never mind. This is back in because decade. Okay. Anyway, minutes are unlimited. But genuinely, to the 7 of you who really do listen, but if anyone listens in the future, we have so much fun, so we don't really care if you listen. But we would like everyone to
really
share
like it
us
when
with
you
your
do.
friends.
We do care,
But yeah.
And if you think like a cute Buzz Lightyear might, if it sounds right up your alley, you can figure the phone number. I'm sure.
Hit me up. I have a lot of free time, as you can see by the amount of content I consume. But yeah, genuinely, thanks so much for anyone and everyone who listens, and we're excited to be back from movies, and then we'll be announcing a new series within a month-ish. Did you like how I put pressure on Tyler to make sure? All right. Anyway, so my name is Mitchell Marshall, along with
Tyler McKinley.
Marcus Marinos.
Tyler Harris.
Justin Hammer.
Bye, cuties.